You're 7 years old. Today is your wedding day. Your husband is 29. The velvet gown crushes you. Gold scratches your neck. Pearls dig into your forehead like tiny stones. Your feet dangle, too short to reach the floor. Someone is crying, your mother maybe. Faces blur in the cathedral's vast silence. Incense stings your eyes, or maybe it's just fear. You clutch your doll, the last piece of childhood they've allowed. The man beside you, older, taller, frightening, takes your tiny hand for the rings. His grip is iron. You are 7. You cannot read. You still believe in fairy tales. But this is no story. Your life belongs to someone else now. This was not a legend or a dark fairy tale. It was policy. Across medieval Europe and beyond, royal child marriage served a brutally practical purpose: power. When kingdoms needed peace, land, or stronger bloodlines, they sealed agreements not with ink, but with children. Girls between 7 and 12 became living treaties, human guarantees and negotiations they could not understand. The process was deliberate and calculated. Families assessed bloodlines, alliances, military strength, and wealth. The child herself, her personality, her fears, her childhood, didn't factor into the equation. She mattered for what she represented, not who she was. Among common people, marriage often came in the late teens or 20s. Royalty followed different rules. A princess might be promised as a toddler and sent to her husband's court before she'd even lost her baby teeth. In 1396, 6-year-old Isabella of Valois was carried into her wedding ceremony in a blue velvet gown embroidered with golden fleur-de-lis. Her husband, King Richard II of England, was 29. Her dolls were packed beside her jewels. The marriage secured a 28-year truce between England and France. When critics questioned the wisdom of marrying a child decades away from motherhood, Richard reportedly replied that she would grow older every day, as if the passing of time could justify the taking of a childhood. Let's return to that cathedral. You're that 7-year-old girl and you're trying to understand what's happening. The ceremony stretches for hours. Your legs go numb from standing. The Latin words flow over you like water. You catch phrases but can't grasp their meaning. Every eye in the kingdom is watching you. You've been instructed to smile, to stand straight, to not cry. You are a princess. You must be brave, but you are not brave. You are 7. You want your mother. Your new husband places a heavy ring on your finger. It's too large and spins around, threatening to fall off. Someone whispers that you'll grow into it. You try to understand what that means. Will you be here long enough to grow? When can you go home? The feast afterward is overwhelming. Jugglers and musicians perform, but you can't focus on them. Rich food sits untouched on your golden plate because your stomach is twisted with anxiety. Adults toast to your fertility, to future heirs. You don't know what they mean, but something in their tone makes your skin prickle with unease. Your new husband might speak kindly to you. Some did, treating their child brides almost like daughters or nieces, at least in public. Or he might ignore you entirely, disappointed that his political prize comes in such a small, useless package. Either way, you are his property now. The law is clear on that. As the celebration continues, you notice the women watching you with pity, the men with calculation. And slowly, with the horrible clarity that sometimes comes to children, you begin to understand. You are never going home. This palace, this stranger, this life, this is forever. What happened after the ceremony depended entirely on the husband, and that is the hardest truth to face. Some girls were spared, at least for a time. Isabella of Valois, married at 6 to Richard II, was reportedly treated with gentleness. He visited her, brought gifts, encouraged her education. The marriage was political, but it was not immediately enforced in the way many feared. Even so, church law permitted consummation at 12, a threshold that, even by medieval standards, placed children in danger. Others were not protected. Margaret Beaufort married at 12 to Edmund Tudor, 24. Tradition suggested waiting. It did not happen. She became pregnant almost immediately. Her body was still growing. Childbirth nearly killed her. She survived, and so did her son, the future Henry VII, but historians believe the trauma left her unable to bear children again. Years later, when her own granddaughter was to be married young, Margaret urged delay, warning it would endanger her health. That plea speaks volumes. It suggests memory, not just of pain, but of fear. Not every child bride experienced immediate violence, but every one of them lived under imbalance. They had no legal power, no meaningful consent, no ability to refuse expectations placed upon them. Their childhoods were redirected overnight into duty, into alliances, heirs, and household politics. Some tried to preserve fragments of youth, clinging to dolls, to lessons, to prayer. Others adapted in silence. Endurance became survival. Because in a world that treated them as instruments of power, survival was often the only choice left. Your days as a child bride followed a rigid, isolating pattern. You might live in a separate wing of the palace, attended by governesses and ladies-in-waiting chosen by your husband's family. These women were not friends. They were watchers, reporting your words, your tears, even your smallest actions. Privacy did not exist. Isabella of Valois spent most of her time at Windsor Castle, separated from her husband, tutored in English customs and language by Margaret de Courcy. Richard visited occasionally, bringing gifts and kindness, but between visits stretched long, lonely weeks, where she was neither child nor adult, neither English nor French, belonging nowhere. Your education continued, but with a darker purpose. You learned household management, languages, music, and needlework, not for your own future, but to serve your husband and his court. Above all, you were measured by your ability to produce heirs. Every action, every word was scrutinized, every detail assessed. Your value was tied to expectations you could barely understand. Some girls found small ways to assert themselves. Margaret Beaufort, even at 13, insisted her son be named Henry rather than Owen, a tiny rebellion, but one that mattered. Mostly, though, you waited. You waited to grow, to fulfill your imposed purpose, to matter. And in that waiting, you were achingly, utterly alone. Margaret Beaufort went into labor at 13, widowed and 7 months pregnant during the Wars of the Roses. On January 28, 1457, she gave birth to the future King Henry VII at Pembroke Castle. She nearly died. Margaret was small and physically undeveloped. Her body simply wasn't ready for childbirth. Both she and her baby almost didn't survive. That they lived was considered miraculous, but the cost was severe. Modern historians believe the trauma left her permanently infertile. She was far from alone. Girls aged 12 to 14 faced horrific risks. Their bodies were still growing, their pelvic bones undeveloped. Complications like obstructed labor, hemorrhaging, and infection were common. Infant mortality was high. Many babies survived only hours or days. Even surviving one birth often meant facing the same dangers repeatedly. Royal families demanded heirs, an heir and a spare, leaving traumatized girls to endure pregnancy again and again. Medically, everyone knew these children were at risk. Physicians recommended waiting until a girl was older, but these protections depended entirely on the husband's honor, something history shows was not always respected. Let's look at the lives stolen by this practice. Isabella of Valois was married at 6, widowed at 10 when Richard II was deposed and murdered. The new king, Henry IV, wanted to marry her to his son. At 10 years old, this grief-stricken child had to refuse a king to protect herself. She went into mourning for a husband she'd known more as a kindly uncle than a spouse. When she finally returned to France at age 11, She was married again at 16 to her cousin Charles, Duke of Orléans, who was 11 years old. 3 years later, at 19, Isabella died in childbirth. Her daughter survived, but Isabella herself, who'd been a political pawn since she was 6, did not. She never had a chance at a real childhood, and she never made it to 20. Margaret Beaufort was married at 12, widowed at 13 while 7 months pregnant, gave birth in conditions of extreme danger and trauma at 13. Despite living into her 60s and marrying twice more, she never had another child. The damage was permanent. But Margaret's story also shows remarkable resilience. She became one of the most powerful women in England, using her intelligence and political acumen to help her son claim the throne and establish the Tudor dynasty. She later founded colleges and became a patron of education. Even in discussing her granddaughter's proposed marriage, she fought to protect another girl from experiencing what she'd endured. Eleanor of Provence was married at 13 to 28-year-old King Henry III of England. She'd never met him before the wedding day. Within 3 years, at 16, she'd given birth to her first son. By age 20, she'd had 3 children. The physical toll on her developing body was immense, though unlike many others, she survived. These weren't exceptions. These were patterns repeated across centuries, in England, France, Spain, Portugal, and beyond. Each name represents a childhood stolen, a girl forced into womanhood before her time, a body pushed beyond its capacity. Could a child bride escape? Almost never. If your husband died young, widowhood offered little freedom. You had virtually no rights. His family could keep you, marry you off again, or return you to your birth family without consent. You were passed from hand to hand like property. Isabella of Valois had more agency than most, but only because she was a king's daughter backed by her father. Most child brides had no protection. Running away was nearly impossible. No money, no rights, constant surveillance, and severe punishment if caught. Some sought refuge in convents, but even then, family pressure often forced them back into marriage. The cruelest reality: many eventually internalized their captivity. They told themselves they were fulfilling their duty, that suffering had meaning, that their lives existed for political stability or heirs. Convincing yourself that a prison is your purpose was sometimes the only way to survive. Before we conclude, it's crucial to acknowledge this isn't just history. Child marriage still exists today. UNICEF estimates that 12 million girls under 18 are married each year. The contexts differ. Poverty often replaces political alliance. Cultural tradition replaces royal duty. But the core injustice remains the same. Children forced into adult roles, their agency stripped away, their bodies put at risk. In some regions, girls are married at 12, 13, 14 to significantly older men. They face the same medical dangers Margaret Beaufort faced in 1457. Childbirth complications, fistulas, maternal mortality. Their education ends. Their childhood ends. Their autonomy, before they even understand what autonomy is, ends. The historical child brides we've discussed didn't have a choice. They lived in times when their suffering was considered normal, even necessary. But we live now. We know better. And yet, for millions of girls, the nightmare continues. Organizations working to end child marriage exist in nearly every country. They need support, funding, and voices willing to say this practice is wrong, whether it happened in 1396 or is happening in 2026. When you look at portraits of Isabella of Valois from her wedding day, she is painted older than 6. Perhaps artists couldn't bear to show a sobbing child in an oversized crown handed to a grown man. Margaret Beaufort's portraits show her only in later life, severe and powerful. We have no images of her at 12 or 13. Perhaps some traumas are too devastating to capture. These girls, and countless others whose names we'll never know, deserve childhoods. They deserve to play, to learn, to grow safely, and to make choices about their own bodies and futures. Instead, They were commodified, traumatized, and often endangered by the very institution meant to honor them. Their resilience is remarkable. Margaret survived and shaped a legacy of power and education. Isabella maintained grace and dignity through repeated trauma. They were children forced into impossible situations, yet they endured. We remember them not to romanticize suffering, but to honor stolen childhoods, and to reaffirm that no child, anywhere, should face what they did. They deserved better. Every child deserves better.